Now, as much as the president would love to direct the Attorney General's office to fire Robert Mueller, it ain't going to happen. No matter how often the mainstream media wishes it to be, this president is painted into a political corner because of the so-called independent counsel. So how much longer? How much more of this? How many more people will be targeted by Mueller that have zero to do with so-called Russia collusion? When does this open-ended investigation end? Joining me now from Southern California, prosecutorial attorney and legal analyst Wendy Patrick. Wendy, constitutionally speaking, the President of the United States has every right to fire Robert Mueller through the Attorney General's office if he so chooses. Politically speaking, it's not going to happen because it would literally bring almost an immediate impeachment case against the president.
That's exactly right, Graham. And one wonders why we continue to talk about this like it might happen, or gosh, maybe this is the week that the president is going to decide to do this. Donald Trump himself has continually said, I have no intention of firing Robert Mueller. So we can speculate about it. I say this is the royal we. It's always being discussed. It's not going to happen. What is fueling the fire, no doubt, is the continued tweeting. The one most recently is the first time the president ever used Mueller's name in a tweet. That's not a big deal. But for many people that think it actually is a harbinger of things to come, that's why we're talking about it again today. Well, I agree with you. It won't happen.
It's the mainstream media that's apoplectic about, he actually used Robert Mueller's name. Yeah. Oh, no. What do we do now? I mean, this is all silliness. Now, Andy McCarthy is a pretty well-known and respected former prosecutor. He writes for various publications now. He says this in general about Rosenstein. Rosenstein instead put the cart before the horse. Mueller was invited to conduct a fishing expedition, a boundless quest to hunt for undisclosed crimes rather than an investigation and prosecution of known crimes. I think you might depart with me on this one, but isn't this the way we're supposed to operate in this country, where there is an investigation, there's an alleged crime, and then we go after that person? It seems as though Mueller is doing the opposite. He's out there looking around for people who may have committed crimes. Heck, he could probably bust me for jaywalking about 4 or 5 years ago. I'm on his list, apparently. I mean, that's not the way it's supposed to be happening in this country, in our constitutional republic. It's what happens in third world dictatorships, doesn't it?
Well, my answer is yes and no, and here's why I answer that way. Not just because that's the legal answer, but because yes in the sense that he was given a mandate what to look at. Obviously, he's looking at the Russian investigation and whether or not there was any collusion, quote unquote. But also remember that his charge included the ability to investigate any crimes he came across as he was doing that basic investigation. We already knew he's done that because we've seen the indictments come down. There's been a couple of guilty pleas. This is not unlike the investigation into Whitewater that became Monica Lewinsky in the Clinton administration. Yeah. So it's not unprecedented that we go off on tangents and other evidence is uncovered that leads to other crimes.
It's not unprecedented, but it's rather unsavory from a legal perspective and a constitutional perspective, isn't it? Doesn't it bother you at all?
Here's the counter-argument. Well, here's the counter-argument, Graham. I mean, you can come up with arguments on both sides of this, but one of the things that really is upsetting many of the Trump supporters is why are we looking in places that was never intended by the original mandate? Why are we going on, and many people are using the term fishing expedition? Right. The problem, and I'm very sympathetic with that point of view, but the problem is we are not privy to all of the facts and circumstances that Mueller's team is. Right. I got to tell you, for all the allegations of leaking, there were no leaks when it came down to the investigation and the indictments. We were all surprised. Remember, they came down on Friday afternoons. People are fired and people are indicted on Friday afternoons, Graham.
But there has been a wholesale leaking in other regards with the Mueller investigation.
Well, in some regards. But in terms of the kind of evidence they're looking at, we really don't have as much information as we'd like in order to determine whether or not they've really gone off the rails in their investigation or whether they really were doing their job and just uncovered some other facts and circumstances they had to investigate.
Well, to see if he's off the rails here, because I want to go back to Andy McCarthy again on the DOJ policy. He wrote about this as well, which is a big deal. Andrew McCarthy saying, with Rosenstein's passive approval, Mueller is shredding Justice Department charging policy by alleging earth-shattering crimes, then cutting a sweetheart deal that shields the defendant from liability for those crimes and from the penalties prescribed in Congress. Great example is Flynn. General Flynn. And he comes down on this guy and then ends up forcing him essentially to plead to lying. In the meantime, he's broken the guy. He's financially ruined, has to sell his house. He's trying to do the same thing to Manafort here. He's digging up these crimes. Manafort may or may not be guilty, but again, this has zero to do with Russian collusion and everything to do with pouring the kitchen sink on these guys and hoping they'll break, right?
Well, on the one hand, it's probably true that there were lots of other things they could have pled to, and they pled to something that was very low. There's a difference, Graham, between plea bargaining and sentence bargaining. Lots of cooperation agreements involve pleading to a very serious charge.
Right.
And then sentence bargaining means the prosecutor tells the judge the extent to the defendant's cooperation. They agree that it's going to be a more lenient sentence. But you're right in that the charge that, for example, Flynn pled to was a very lenient charge. But I come back again to, I wish I knew more about the background circumstances that justified this plea. You know, we only know what's reported in the news media. But the FBI doesn't have to show their hand as to all of the things they know about the parties involved and why they chose to offer this kind of a plea.
No, but we know the indictments, right?
Well, we know what the indictments are, but also remember, we don't know, since it didn't go to trial, we don't have all the facts and circumstances beyond what was in the indictment. You can't put everything in there. And we also wonder whether or not this was one of those cases that there's more coming down the pike that we haven't seen yet, that we don't know about, that also might have justified plea bargaining more so than sentence bargaining, like we're used to seeing. I'm
almost out of time. I am out of time, but I got to ask you real quick about Andrew McCabe and these memos. What value would these memos be to Mueller if it is exactly what it sounds like, and that's a memorialization of somebody's opinion of a meeting that may or have taken place? What value is it to a prosecutor like this?
I think you just answered it, Graham. It's somebody's opinion as to what just took place. So someone's subjective opinion as to what they thought just transpired has exactly that amount of value. Objectively, others might see it very differently. So obviously, you know, we all have our own biased perspective of what goes on. So I think that that's going to limit the utility of those memos. But I also think it's good that he memorialized them. We'll see what they say if we ever get a chance.
And obviously, a prosecutor in this case would look for some sort of corroboration of these memorializations. Wendy, thank you.
Thank you.